Ever wondered how the Supreme Court came to be the Supreme Court? In this video, we're going to explore this idea using the landmark Supreme Court case of Marbury v. Madison. It all started with the election of 1800. It was Thomas Jefferson of the Democratic Republican Party versus the current president, John Adams, of the Federalist Party. Their two parties were a lot like the Democrat and Republican Party of today. They were always fighting over some kind of issue. The Democratic Republicans had a policy of anti-federalism. That is to say, they wanted the federal government to have as little power as possible. This meant that they supported things such as a strict interpretation of the Constitution, states' rights, and a weak federal government. The Federalists, on the other hand, wanted the exact opposite. They thought the nation would be better off with a strong federal government in order to keep things as balanced as possible throughout the growing nation. They also favored a loose interpretation of the Constitution and limited individual and states' rights. When the votes were counted, Thomas Jefferson had won. In an effort to prolong his influence over the nation, the current president, John Adams, appointed 58 of his party members to various government offices just before Jefferson took office. These appointments were called midnight judges because Adams had appointed them so late in his term. His Secretary of State, John Marshall, was in charge of signing and delivering the appointments. Marshall was able to sign and deliver all but 17. Jefferson took office and appointed James Madison to be his Secretary of State. Naturally, Jefferson wanted his party to be in control of the nation, so he ordered Madison to not deliver the remaining 17 appointments. One of the intended recipients of these commissions, William Marbury, was outraged. He called for the court to issue a writ of mandamus. A writ of mandamus is an order from a court to an inferior government official ordering the government official to properly fulfill their official duties or to correct an abuse of discretion. So essentially, an official way of asking someone to do their job properly. This case made its way to the Supreme Court where Chief Justice John Marshall, remember him, denied the petition. But wait, why would he deny the petition when Marbury and Marshall were from the same party? This is where the landmark decision comes in. You see, when Jefferson came to office, Marshall was serving as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. This meant that two branches of government, the executive and the judicial, were under the leadership of two different parties. This made for an uncomfortable situation, to say the least. So Marshall's decision to deny the writ appeased Jefferson and made it easier for the two branches to work together. But what did Marshall stand to gain from this? Well, in his statement explaining the position of the court, Marshall said, quote, "It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. Those who apply the rule to particular cases must of necessity expound and interpret that rule. If two laws conflict with each other, the courts must decide on the operation of each." End quote. This meant that the Supreme Court was in charge of reviewing the law and deciding if it was constitutional or not. So while Marshall initially decreased the power of his party by denying the writ of mandamus, he exponentially increased the power of the judicial branch in the long run. He declared the court's right to the power of judicial review, a power that has heavily shaped today's nation. For example, it was used in Brown v. Board of Education to declare that the previous policy of, quote, separate but equal, end quote, used in schools to justify segregation was unconstitutional. Or Engel v. Vitale, which declared that mandated recitation of prayers in school was unconstitutional. There are numerous other cases in which judicial review has been used, further proving its importance. So now, when you think of Marbury v. Madison, you can realize that it's not just another long, boring Supreme Court case, but an extremely influential decision which has greatly shaped the world in which we live today.
Created using Powtoon.